name is Joël Rouleau. I'm an assistant professor in Montreal International Studies. I'll be chairing and presenting this panel called Recherche-création and Ethnography Part 2. So I guess it was the order that I did. We are going to start with Eileen Marioka, who is a writer, a game developer, and a PhD student here at Concordia. Her current research focuses on feminist social media practices, chronic pain, and invisible illness. She has published on self-imaging, Instagram, online effective labor, and the intersection of media and trauma. Her most recent project, Circuits, is a digital narrative about the difficult act of narrating sexual trauma within institutional spaces and can be played for free online. So you will be going to get a book in my Sorry. There's a MP3 audio file to be played later on, and it's a bit complicated, but we're good? All right.
Okay, is this okay? All right. So you'll have to forgive me. The irony here is that I'm talking about pain in the brain, and unfortunately, this weekend, pain is getting in the way of my brain. So I'm having a little bit of trouble reading aloud, so just bear with me. So this is early exploration into the work that I'm doing for my PhD at Concordia University. And for this presentation, I will be drawing mostly from theory and my own experience as one person with endometriosis and chronic pain in a network of many others. My dissertation research will involve more ethnographic work, including interviews and analyses of people's social media posts. But because I want to have people's consent before using this information, I'm going to be mostly laying out the theoretical side here today. So in Eula Biss's lyric essay, The Pain Scale, she writes, quote, "The devil is in the fractions. Although the distance between 1 and 2 is finite, it contains infinite fractions. This could also be said of the distance between my mind and my body, my 1 and my 2, my whole and its parts." In The Pain Scale, Biss writes about our experiences with chronic pain by talking about the scale from 1 to 10 used by doctors to measure patients' pain. This scale has been critiqued extensively for its subjectivity and unhelpfulness, but continues to be widely used in clinical practice. Pain has often been theorized as being unrepresentable by language and by numbers, most famously in Elaine Scarry's book, The Body in Pain. Recently, however, scholars have focused on how people continue to represent pain both despite and because of these limitations. In fact, a number of scholars use this piece by Eula Biss to make precisely this point, arguing that Biss represents the unrepresentability of pain in ways that make it visible and shareable. Biss's piece is beautiful, and I recommend reading it if you haven't already. But in my presentation, I want to look at how we can come to read and witness people's everyday accounts of their pain in ways that afford the same level of understanding as Biss's essay. Biss articulates how intertwined her mind and body are, as well as how her pain comes to be structured through her relations to others. As many scholars have argued, pain shows us something about the ways in which we are tied together through shared vulnerabilities and interdependencies. I argue that chronic pain, in particular, shows us something important about how we, as vulnerable bodies, come to share knowledge and feelings. As Alison Kafer writes, disability is experienced in and through relationships, and I think it's the same to be said for pain. Chronic pain upsets the objectivity of the medical sciences in its very chronicity. It rejects healing and calls for a new system of caring, one that allows for a different temporality of illness and values the expertise of patients. People with chronic illnesses do not fit into the practices of medical institutions and instead become problem patients. Medical humanities and narrative medicine scholars such as Arthur Kleinman, Julia Epstein, Frida, as well as others, have argued that space needs to be made for other ways of knowing within medical institutions. They argue for the importance of listening to people with chronic illnesses and Kleinman goes so far as to suggest that the chronically ill are archivists of their own experiences. He argues that through storytelling, myth-making, or any other practice of giving order to their experience, people with illnesses create a kind of self-knowledge that needs to be heard. I argue alongside these scholars that the knowledge of people with chronic pain is valuable and could be better incorporated into clinical practices and medical discourse. However, I'm particularly interested in what we can learn about pain, such as how to care for it, as well as how it is felt, from talking about life writing, specifically life writing practices on social media. Despite pain's common representation as unrepresentable, these acts of communication, Lee Gilmore argues, have, quote, the capacity to shape knowledge about pain, about how it is suffered and endured. What can the knowledge-sharing practices and acts of community care in online chronic pain communities teach us about what's lacking in the medical institutions? How do these users' definitions of their own pain differ from what medicine says? So in this slide, I've included one of Frida Kahlo's paintings titled The Broken Column from 1944. This painting shows Kahlo with her long dark hair and unibrow standing in a white brace with a white sheet around her waist. Her chest is split open to reveal her backbone, a metal pole which is breaking apart. There are nails embedded in her skin. I've included this image to show how effective and affective the representations of chronic pain from people with chronic pain can be, especially in comparison to something like the pain scale. There are, of course, many reasons for the failures of the medical system, and these failures also differ between locations. For this presentation, I'm mainly focusing on issues around representation, comprehension, and communication. Patients with chronic pain tend to worry about just simply being believed. They worry about coming off as simultaneously too strong or too weak, too upset or too calm. Gender, race, and class all play a role in which patients are believed, and unfortunately those who are the most marginalized tend to be the ones most often dismissed. Lisa Folkmarson-Kall, that's K-A-L-L, directly argues that there is a need for articulating pain in other ways than those offered by evidence-based medical models that tend to miss many of the subjectively lived dimensions of the body and pain, as well as the complex ways in which it's situated, experienced, and produced in cultural, social, political, and historical contexts. There's a reason I put that up there. It's an extremely long quotation. There is more to pain than just sensation, but also how it comes to be structured socially, relationally, and in the body. Research into narrative medicine shows how writing about pain can create what pain comes to mean. As Gilmore writes, quote, life writers recraft or reimage their symbolic and material body and its borders, and reformulate pain in the process. These narratives, she writes, situate patients as active producers of meaning. They hold the possibility for changing the meaning of pain both socially and in one's body. Recent pain management research has shown how the sensations of chronic pain can be changed based on one's understanding of how that pain is processed in their mind. This is not to argue that pain is all in one's head in the sense that it's somehow illegitimate, or that having something all in one's head makes it less real, but to rather bring the body and mind back together so as to better understand how pain comes to be felt, communicated, and treated. Although pain is often assumed to be a warning signal that something is physically wrong in the body, such as an underlying disease or illness, medical scholars have shown how chronic pain can become an ailment itself with no other cause. The longer someone's pain persists, and the more we come to expect that pain, the worse those sensations can become. In other words, pain as we feel it is not just a direct sensation of the inputs our bodies receive, it is an interpretation of these inputs. This research has shown that a person's understanding of this fact, of how their pain is neurologically and cognitively structured, can improve their overall symptoms. And this is something that is relatively new to Western medicine, but not so much other practices. This recent medical research brings the mind and body together under a critical lens to examine how pain is both emotionally and physically structured, and also offers patients some agency to address and care for themselves. This medical perspective, however, remains focused on treating the individual subject and lacks an understanding of the patient as someone who's intertwined in complex social relations that inevitably structure their interpretations and subsequently the meaning and sensation of their pain. For example, living in an ableist world. The emotional, affective, and sensory components of pain are closely linked. It is an inherently subjective experience that relies on a number of physical and affective factors. Therefore, the mind's influence over the body has proven increasingly important in chronic pain treatment, not as a single solution, but as an important part of pain management. Although pain management theorists have been considering the role of emotion in treating patients, they tend to look at it mainly on an individual level. I argue that there is work to be done towards exploring a more social understanding of pain within pain management. So I approached this topic based on the critical work on relationality and affect done by scholars such as Sarah Ahmed and Judith Butler. Ahmed's chapter on the contingency of pain and the cultural politics of emotion, and Judith Butler's books, Precarious Lives and Regarding the Pain of Others, consider the ways in which humans are tied together through their shared vulnerabilities. Ahmed positions pain as a contingent relationship, one that is solitary and individualized, but also always structured in relation to the other. Butler talks about precarity and vulnerability under similar terms by considering how the human experience is one that is simultaneously isolating, but also entangled with others. Butler argues that humans are tied together by their shared vulnerability to one another, and that this can create a space of ethical engagement. Joanna Hedva makes a similar argument in their eloquent article, Sick Woman Theory, to describe the ways in which the sick woman is marginalized. For them, the sick woman is an identity and a body that can belong to anyone who is denied the privileged existence. They argue that resistance comes in the form of care, of caring for both the self and the other. Like Butler, they argue about the ethical potential of shared vulnerability and shared pain. Autobiography makes ethical claims, writes Lee Gilmore. Autobiographical accounts travel a social circuit. They circulate senses of the social world. They seek connection. They translate. These accounts of the self, such as blog posts, Twitter posts, etc., represent not only the individual subjective experiences of a self, but also how that self is always in relation to others. Similarly, although pain is always embodied individually, it is also structured through relations and cannot be divorced from the power structures that come to situate its meaning. The scholar Kelly Fritsch, which is Fritsch, in writing about her own illness, describes it not as solely hers, but of the world, of others both human and non-human. Similarly, Gilmore characterizes the body as a porous ecosystem. The sensation of pain comes to be felt through complicated relations between our body and mind, our nervous system and cognitive processes. But it is even further constructed through social relations, through the support of others, through our experience in medical institutions, through our conceptions of ability and disability, through our understanding of pain, through a desire for productivity, and through our model of ourselves in relationship to others. The distance between these relations contain, to refer back to that piece by Eula Biff, infinite fractions. But this relationality is also what makes pain shareable and potentially radical or resistant. Call writes that pain, as a way of being in the world, has the power to reorganize lived space and time, as well as relations with others, with our world, and with ourselves. In this slide is another painting by Frida Kahlo called Henry Ford Hospital from 1932. She depicts herself with a swollen belly, crying and laying naked in a bloody bed, a representation of her miscarriage in Detroit. Around her are 6 floating objects tied to her body with red ribbons resembling umbilical cords: a snail, a male fetus, a pink pelvic mold, a machine, an orchid, and a pelvic bone. I chose this image because I believe it depicts not only Kahlo's physical pain, but also her emotional pain, as well as how these pains come to be tied together and constructed through one another. The painting also represents some of the many interrelations and entanglements of the body in pain. So pain, I argue, is not simply pain, it is pains with an S. It is multiple, plural, and always embedded within a complex web of relations. It is because of this plurality of pains that I am invested in exploring the ways that people with chronic pain come to talk about their experiences in networks and overlapping online communities. I think perhaps it's not enough to simply talk about these practices of representation as life writing, but to use a word that Smith and Watson originally posited, which is automedia, so like autobiography, but automedia. This is a term that is used to talk about life writing across platforms and different media. It includes everything from an image posted on Instagram to a standard print memoir, while also acknowledging the different subjectivities between these different platforms. I argue that these automedia practices of people with chronic pain tend to involve not only self-representation, but also community care efforts, such as the sharing of resources, moral support, knowledge, and medical advice. These efforts, like pain itself, exist within a web of relations, and unlike medical institutions, address the multiplicity of the self in pain. These communities are far more willing to listen to and believe the symptoms than many medical professionals. As I witnessed in my own social media communities around chronic pain, it is through these online interactions that many people first arrive at diagnosis. Although an official scientific diagnosis cannot be made through online communities, the first steps of being heard, of having one's pain acknowledged, and of finding a possible reason behind the pain can all take place in these spaces. So I would therefore claim that these practices are an important example of HETVA's notion of resistance through care. So I argue for the importance of sharing pain not as a sensation, but as a concept, as something that comes to mean and matter. And I kind of want to end with this quote from David Biro, who writes, "If we do not see pain better, we, referring to both sufferers and observers of pain, then the experience is in danger of remaining private. It becomes easier not to see, and in some cases even to dismiss, which is surely one of the reasons that doctors, along with the rest of society, have not always been very successful at responding to pain." That's me presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Support group is Safe Driving Advocacy nonprofit is affiliated with the National Safety Council. He improves the community as a member of the Toledo Mucus County Commissions on Disability and works for the largest mental health care provider in Northwest Ohio in the United States. So what is going to present?
Okay. We're just going to bring up this PowerPoint. It might just take a second, but we'll also
15 copies.
15 copies.
Including 2 access copies.
Amazing, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Doug, you came prepared, man.
Despite all appearances. Okay, let's go.
Is this your two texts? One is the PowerPoint?
One is the PowerPoint, the other is the slides.
Perfect.
The top is the text, and
Got it,
the
Doug.
bottom is the slides.
Doug, thank you again for coming prepared, my friend.
Yes, well, thank you. And thanks to Sam. Wow, you guys are doing a lot of stuff. Sure. That's perfect. Okay. So
Sorry. Here.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations and great thanks to VIBE participants, presenters, and organizers. You guys all deserve a huge round of applause. Yay. Hello, my name is Douglas. I live in Toledo, Ohio. I use pronouns he, him, his. For those who access the world differently, I have faded red hair, green eyes, wear a neon yellow shirt, black pants. From an ancient past, I have Neanderthal genes. My last ancestor from North Africa lived to 1780. In the last 3 centuries, Scottish, English, Irish, German, French, Scandinavian, East European descent in decreasing order, mainly from the British Isles. Trigger warning, description images of catastrophic car accident, coma, amnesia, physical, emotional impairment, emotional trauma, injury, expression, and presentation of severe traumatic brain injury. My presentation is entitled Embodiment and Autoethnography and Performance Poetry. Living with severe traumatic brain injury. Relax, Doug. Okay. So I guess it's to move to the next slide.
Love the transitions, Doug. I love it.
Okay, Richard. Richard is seated. Obviously, I'm standing behind him. 11,294 days ago, before midnight, Thursday. Okay. 11,294 days ago, before midnight, Thursday, December 31st, 1987, as a pedestrian, a car without headlights ran through him, fled the scene. Severe traumatic brain injury, spent a year in coma, had respiratory failure, hemiplegia, unable to process as most do, no awareness of time, speaks haltingly in perseveration loops, few intact memories. Douglas, 4,947 days ago, 4:34 p.m., Tuesday, May 17, 2005. Cell phone distracted, failed to yield to an SUV. Full description of my injuries and outcomes later. Note impact of Richard's accident on me and presentation music. Yes, I guess it would be a good time to start. An avid Miles Davis fan since 19, I obtained new albums as they issued. Siesta appeared in November 1987. Richard's accident occurred 6 weeks later. I could not cope with Richard's tragic circumstances then, so I abused drugs 3 times per week and listened at full volume on headphones to the hauntingly beautiful music from Miles and Marcus Miller. Now 25 years in recovery from substances, I am empowered as I listen to Siesta, often tearful as my mind-body recalls those dark times, but at last I am renewed and celebrate Richard's life. As never before has this full presentation occurred, please forgive any confusion between competing volumes of the music and my voice. Okay. I'm sorry. This performance is dedicated to my mom and dedicated to my neurodivergent sisters, Lindsay Anderson and Tanya Caulfield. Great thanks to both for promoting acceptance and pride. My first poem, and the next slide. Richard is lost. 1987 ended with crime, injury, agony, catalyzed odysseys of pain. Heartbreaking anguish moments continue till this day. Severe traumatic brain injury, oxygen-deprived brain damage, coma, medically induced coma, bored holes in his skull, relief pressure, multiple compound cracks, fractures, cranium rocked. However, did Richard survive? Extraordinary efforts to save him? Yes, please do, with all speed, skill, haste. Savagely stolen childhood lifelong friend, suddenly and forever grave. Happy New Year, 1988. The following surged onto paper nearly fully formed in less than 2 minutes. It was December 2008 when I had just returned from holiday shopping when an image of Richard alone in his wheelchair in his room came to mind. Never before had anything remotely like the urgent need to express sorrow, hurt, anger, frustration, guilt occurred. The experience left me sad, shaking, terrified. I can try to duplicate how the words came out, but it might be a little jumbled, so forgive me. Richard, Christmas, and me. Gifts for Richard, people, me included, scurry about, achieving little except buying things we could easily live without, as if we were trying to put salve on a wound that is not there. His concerns more immediate. View seldom changes, only interrupted by sessions of pain caused by others who make a living on his inability to do for himself what most of us take for granted, to dress himself impossible. And why should he attempt to cover what his survival wrought? He did not choose to live life like this, but was thrust upon him by people who could not bear the thought of life without him. What hell to bear witness to the collapse of another's life. Oh, the lives he could have lived. Desolates the mind, breaks open the heart. Torment to watch, little relief to his life. People, me included, distracted by trivia, days split past, usually beginning with, what will I do today? Personal trials yields this question. Best gift of the day? Make easier the pass for Richard. And I should have forwarded it to that. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go back a couple, because this is where I'm going to transition to my experience. So a critical difference in the realities we confront stems from Richard's inability to self-advocate. Consequently, he is unable to resist the action of others, therefore vulnerable with his life subject to chance. Especially early on during my recovery, I shared similar circumstances and experiences to Richard. My close connection to Richard leads to complete acceptance, identification, and love. While Richard's journey is a series of disabling events, my experience is largely one of impairment. In stark contrast to the abuse and neglect of Richard's experience, my journey is one of recovering and enhancing my physical, cognitive, psychological, emotional abilities to meet demands, challenges from society. Now pieces of my experience. Oblivion. Hurtling mass crushes... Oh, I'm going to go forward again, sorry. Okay. Hurtling mass crushes metals, shatters glass, hips fracture, heart drains, brain damage, pain ascends, hope fades, whelmed by wreckage, sleep, not asleep, time sweeps past. Another terrifying stream of consciousness. Am I doing okay with the volume?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks. I love it. Another terrifying stream of consciousness surfaced nearly fully formed in less than 5 minutes. Desperate cry run. This is called coma amnesia survival. Desperate cry rends night. Crimson pain sears sight. Cavern dark, absent light. Stony silence burns bright. Blood pressure falling slight. Compartment stretch. Swellings of fright. Brain compression, new height. Infection clutches, grips tight. Amnesia enters. Confusion, fright. Blankets memory shatters might. Severs confidence, inner blight. Emerging identity, fragile flight. Machines rescue, working right. Hope reverberates, survival tonight. Corners turn, hearts delight. Life certain, cognition alike. You bet. Okay. The next poem. Like devastation precipitated by molten magma sliding through the ocean depths, compelling massive shifts to tectonic plates, releasing tremendous energies that coalesce, rise, surface, form waves, speed away, bring into being destructive tsunami. The tremendous concussive forces of the collision cause bloody brain damage, trauma, coma, amnesia, beleaguered cells, time pass, cells eventually settle, reassemble, reorient, restructure, realign, flicker back to life, Disjointed identity reforms, cognition resumes, nascent self returns. Okay. So I'm now going to transition to the autoethnography phase, and I've got a brief introduction. A few years ago, my friend Dr. Stephen Singer helped me develop disability memoir. Parts of the next section I owe to him. Earlier this year, I presented in Malta to the Euro-Mediterranean Conference on Disability Studies and Disability Activism, organized by the Department of Disability Studies, Faculty of Social Wellbeing of the University of Malta. My presentation was so well received, I was encouraged to submit to Encounters Between Disability Studies and Critical Trauma Studies, published by the Romanian journal Word and Text, a journal of literary studies and linguistics. This publication is now issued. The following developed through work with editors Dr. Eileen of Shanghai Jingtong University and Dr. Anne-Marie Kahlo of the University of Malta. Great thanks to both for their many efforts. I don't have any slides for this section, so now I ask simple questions and provide conceptual frameworks illustrating how massive forces of an automobile collision erase conventional understandings of my essence, identity, and reduce me to a collection of cells struggling for survival in an indifferent universe. First question, what is reality? Answer, reality may be seen as matter energy existing within the space-time continuum. Second question, what is a human being? Answer, a human being can be regarded as a discrete mass of biological tissue, a matrix factory where electrochemical interchanges occur. I know we're a lot more than that, but when you break it down, reality shapes defines human beings as biological tissue awash in nutrient molecules interacts with external matter, energy, gravity. Most human beings from birth acquire abilities to process reality. Imagine, however, processing reality, but at a slower rate. So much slower society leaves you behind. For weeks, my body existed, but I was separate, outside of time. 2005's longest day swept past, no awareness of self or time, detached, apart. Vague impressions of the outside world, sounds, voices, some comforting, familiar, brought the world closer, then receded. Who am I? What am I? When did this happen? Why was I held captive? In an agitated state, compelled to flee, ripped tubes from throat and body, left bed, only to hit the cold antiseptic floor hard. Subdued by staff, tears streaming, fought with every fiber of my being for release until finally collapsing under the weight of strong hands, exhaustion, sedation, ensnared, entuned to my mind, enmeshed by a straitjacket, unable to escape, pinned to my bed. Few visible scars exist, others indelibly submerged. As memory surfaced, tears well in my eyes, splashed down my face. As the delicate electrochemical structures of my brain experienced massive damage and disorientation, I existed for months without a sense of time. In the days following my attempt to leave, I complied with treatment. Later, as machines healed me, noises and terrible odors emanating from the devices summoned me to the surface. For months, adult cognition failed. The operational fulcrum developed for decision-making became damaged, diminished, reverted. Slowly, steadily, I re-engaged my surroundings with the cognitive, emotional abilities of a young child. I am informed my childlike curiosity developed an insatiable hunger for audiovisual stimulation. I would spend hours in bed absorbing the sounds and images of children's programming on a small television held so close it touched my nose. It was on a retractable arm. Stuff was on my bed. People said that I was lying in bed and with this television right there. Well, I don't remember any of that. I have to say this, and usually I was okay. Um, okay. Days passed. Friends read me children's books. Others report I would giggle and bounce my legs up and down in eager anticipation as pages turned. This stimulation helped me greatly as I first re-engaged the world. Acquisition of spatial relationships, cognitive, psychological, emotional abilities gained in the first days and years of life are small, incremental. Individuals on neurotypical life trajectories experience a progression of days where knowledge gained from previous lessons is retained, enhanced, sharpened, and cemented. This usual development over time creates the neural pathways that become tools or lenses with which we learn to recognize, process, and navigate our surroundings. We are equipped at the cellular level to identify and interpret the world we encounter. The brain, encased inside dense bone, receives input from eyes and sensory organs to process and understand external environments. Most take for granted the time required to navigate disparate elements of reality successfully, to process, to make sense of the melange of ordinary and extraordinary environments in which we find ourselves immersed. I took for granted the neurotypical development I enjoyed prior to my accident. Then disconnection from time and self I experienced marked the beginning of my new life. As coma amnesia subsided, somehow I filtered back to damaged brain tissue, enough neurons realigned, reactivated, and I surfaced fully in late 2005. Without a clear understanding of what had occurred, disoriented, whelmed by emotion, overjoyed with simply being alive, I reunited with family, friends, then resumed my life with my identity profoundly altered. Brutally cold winter's night, at home lying in bed, exhausted, caught a reflection in the mirror but did not recognize the stranger. Who was he? Looks familiar, but suddenly the sinking realization face in the mirror was I. Time dilated for many intense minutes, body convulsed, mind collapsed, tears fell. Like falling from a great height, I shattered on the cold, hard ground of pitiless reality. The episode left me breathless. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next slide. My mental physical decomposition that night was hardly surprising. Only 8 months had passed since 4:34 p.m. Tuesday, May 17th, when I initiated the call and failed to yield to a 3,000 kilogram or 6,500 pound SUV traveling 80 kilometers per hour, or was going about 50, and it smashed into me. Catastrophic injuries. Oh, I'm sorry. So that's the SUV. That's my car. That's an interior view with the cell phone in the near left foreground. And there's a picture of me in ICU. Catastrophic injuries, severe traumatic brain injury with hemorrhaging led to coma amnesia of 75 days. Massive internal bleeding from lacerations to rectum, liver, spleen, abdomen. Compartment syndrome to my right leg. Multiple hip fractures, cardiac arrest, respiratory failure. MRSA. I was discharged September 15th, 2005. Instead of daily workouts in hospital, I underwent 3 sessions per week of outpatient physical, occupational, and speech therapy. By October 2005, I resumed my work as an industrial designer. I blew my family away 5 months to the day from my last day of work to my next. I still can't believe it. One of the things I've tried to do in this talk is show how my collection of cells gravitated back towards life. By October 2005, I resumed my work as an industrial designer. In January 2006, 8 months after the accident, I returned to university. All pressures to combine to produce the episode. Like using a treadmill that suddenly spins too fast, I fell. Exhausted, brain ceased to process, overwhelmed by fears, shut down, shuddered. Time sped by so fast, too fast, I could not breathe. I felt like I plummeted towards a bottomless pit looking to swallow me whole. Hoped if enough fell, the pool of tears would break my fall, and gently I would float to the surface, safe, whole, alive. 12.5 years removed as of this writing, searing remembrances of my first temporal dissonance remain. As memories surfaced, tears well in my eyes, splashed on my face. So the next are a series of poems. Oh, no, we would need to have the name button.
Possible. Just because we're running a bit out of time.
Sure.
Can we do maybe one of the poems? That would be okay? Or two of them?
Yeah, two of them.
Great.
So this one is ableism's anvil. I'm sorry.
No, nothing's fine.
Ableism's anvil, the treadmill, caught, splayed out by ideals of arbitrary standards of production, hypothetically conjectures quotas to maintain and so remain, felonies against human dignity, and thus divinity is lost. By oppression's need for efficiency, no thought given to cost. Effects of insatiable greed, cruelty, and pain simmer as in a tempest tossed. Best practice for humanity sacrificed on the altar of throughput. Those considered defective, discredited, disabled, helpless, relegated without thought. One more poem and then have to close it. Okay, get to it. This is called Crucible of Trauma, Melding the Fragments Whole. From death, coma, amnesia, straitjacket, separated by walls of brain damage, to rebirth. Feeling, hearing, touching, verbalizing, trying, recalling, organizing, standing, walking, drive to relive, replay, so events turn out differently compels fear, frustration. Grieving quietly, passing, turns to identification, acceptance, belonging. Renewed, refreshed, driven to express, find community, roads to Oswincim, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Palentino, Slima, Montreal. In closing, human beings emerge from and exist within reality. Personal experience illustrates how sensitive the mind-body are as processing tools of reality. Envision the gelatin-like brain defined, ordered, separated by dense bone into compartments of knowing. Consider this working system suddenly violently shaken so hard, brain damage ensues, total negation of self occurs. For a while, loss dominates, time passes. Slowly, brain tissues heal, reconstitute, reassemble, restructure at the cellular level. Cognition flickers, self steals back, reclaiming the void. Now examine one restored human being processing reality in space-time, but with a tendency to slip, disorient. Yet throughout recovery process, a great desire to realize identity, uncover meaning, discover belonging, find community, thank you so much, and celebrate. Peace, and thank you very much for your time.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all these